There's a fortress in Peru where the stones sweat. Not metaphorically. Actually sweat. Water beads up on 500-year-old granite blocks like they're fresh out of a sauna. And nobody could explain why. Until 3 weeks ago, when a team of hydraulic engineers accidentally solved a mystery the Inca took to their graves. Turns out the stones aren't just wet. They're alive. Keep watching. Ollantaytambo sits about 60 miles northwest of Cusco, wedged into a valley so tight you'd think the mountains are having a conversation. It's one of those places where you show up expecting ruins, and instead get slapped in the face by precision engineering that makes modern contractors look like they're working with Lego blocks and hope. The site's been studied for decades, photographed a million times. Tourists climb the terraces, take selfies with the massive stone faces on the Sun Temple, then head back to their hotels thinking they've seen it all. But here's the thing about Ollantaytambo. The more you look, the less sense it makes. Take the 6 monoliths at the top of the Temple of the Sun. Each one weighs about 50 tons. That's roughly the weight of 9 full-grown elephants, or one really ambitious American pickup truck. These blocks were quarried from a mountain 4 miles away, across a river, and then dragged uphill. The Inca didn't have wheels. They didn't have iron tools. They definitely didn't have cranes. And yet there they are, fitted together so precisely you can't slide a credit card between them. But the stones aren't the weird part. Not really. The weird part is the water. Ollantaytambo has a water system so sophisticated that when Spanish conquistadors showed up in 1536, they took one look at it and immediately got their asses kicked. The Inca flooded the plains below the fortress, turned the battlefield into a swamp, and sent the Spanish retreating back to Cusco with their tails between their legs and their horses drowning in Andean irrigation channels. That's documented history. What wasn't documented, what the Inca never wrote down because they didn't have a writing system, was how the water actually worked. And that's where things get interesting. Because in late December 2025, a research team from MIT and the Universidad Nacional de San Antonio Abad del Cusco was doing routine ground-penetrating radar surveys when they found something nobody expected. Underneath the terraces, buried beneath centuries of soil and tourist foot traffic, there's a network. Not just channels. Filtration layers. And something the lead researcher Dr. Elena Vasquez described as, quote, a level of hydrological understanding that rivals modern urban water management, end quote. The Spanish thought the Inca were primitive. Turned out the Inca were out here playing 4D chess with fluid dynamics. Let's talk about what they found. The system has 3 layers. The top layer is what everyone's always known about. The visible channels. The fountains. The little stone aqueducts that carry water down from the mountains and through the agricultural terraces. Cute. Functional. Nothing groundbreaking. The second layer is where it gets spicy. About 2 feet below the surface, there's a network of ceramic pipes. Not clay pipes. Ceramic. The kind of material you need kilns for, temperature control, and understanding of how different clays behave under pressure. These pipes are angled at specific gradients, creating a gravity-fed system that maintains consistent water pressure across the entire site. No pumps, no external power source, just math, geology, and an absurd attention to detail. But the third layer is where the Inca decided to show off. Deep beneath the ceremonial center, there's a series of chambers carved directly into the bedrock. The team found them using sonar imaging, because the rock is so dense. Radar couldn't penetrate it. These chambers are connected by channels that loop back on themselves, creating something Dr. Vasquez called a hydraulic battery. Here's how it works. Water from the mountain streams flows into the upper system, gets filtered through layers of sand and gravel. The ancient version of a Brita filter, then drops into these underground chambers. The chambers are different sizes, different depths, and positioned at different elevations. This creates a pressure differential. When water fills one chamber, it pushes into the next, which pushes into the next, which eventually forces water up through vertical channels into the walls of the buildings above. That's why the stones sweat. The walls at Ollantaytambo are hydrated from the inside. The Inca built a circulatory system for their architecture. The buildings aren't just sitting on the ground. They're breathing. Why would anyone do this? Because it's genius. That's why. The Andean climate swings between freezing nights and scorching days. Stone expands and contracts. Over time, that thermal stress cracks everything. Walls collapse. Joints fail. Entire structures crumble. But if you keep the stone consistently moist, the temperature changes less dramatically. The stone stays stable. The joints stay tight. The buildings last longer. And they did last longer. Ollantaytambo is one of the best preserved Inca sites in existence. Other ruins in the region have weathered and crumbled. Engineers have been scratching their heads about this for years. Turns out the answer was literally flowing through the walls the entire time. But there's more. Because the Inca weren't just worried about preservation, they were worried about earthquakes. Peru sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. The ground shakes. A lot. Modern buildings use steel reinforcements and flexible joints to handle seismic activity. The Inca used water. When an earthquake hits, rigid structures crack. Flexible structures bend. But Ollantaytambo's walls are neither rigid nor flexible. They're fluid. The water-saturated stone has a different resonance frequency than dry stone. It dampens vibrations. When the ground shakes, the walls absorb the energy instead of transferring it through the structure. It's like the difference between shaking a dry sponge and a wet one. The wet one just squishes. It doesn't break. Dr. Vasquez's team tested this. They brought in portable seismographs and measured how the walls responded to controlled vibrations. The hydrated sections showed a 40% reduction in amplitude compared to dry stone. That's not a marginal improvement. That's the difference between a building standing and a building collapsing. The Spanish had no idea. When they conquered the Inca, they took the gold, destroyed the temples, and built their churches on top of Inca foundations because, hey, free real estate. But they didn't understand the water systems. They disrupted the flow, blocked the channels, and wondered why their colonial buildings kept cracking and falling apart while the Inca walls underneath stayed perfect. Karma's a hydraulic engineer, apparently. Now here's where it gets even weirder. The January 2026 follow-up study found evidence that the water system wasn't just passive. It was adjustable. The underground chambers have stone plugs, carved blocks that can be moved to redirect flow. The Inca could control which parts of the site received water and how much. During ceremonies, they could route water to specific fountains, creating visual effects. During droughts, they could prioritize agricultural terraces. During battles, they could flood the valley below. It's a switchboard, a 500-year-old hydraulic switchboard operated by moving rocks. The level of control is absurd. Modern water systems use valves and sensors and computers. The Inca used geometry and an encyclopedic knowledge of their local hydrology. The team also found something else. Traces of mineral deposits in the channels suggest the Inca weren't just moving water. They were moving nutrients. The water flowing through the system picked up dissolved minerals from the rock, then delivered them to the agricultural terraces. The crops weren't just irrigated. They were fertilized by the architecture itself. This explains why Ollantaytambo could support such a large population in such a small valley. They weren't farming in spite of the terrain. They were farming because of the engineering. The entire site is a closed-loop system. Water nourishes the crops. Crops support the people. People maintain the water system. Nothing is wasted. Everything connects. Compare that to modern agriculture, where we dump synthetic fertilizers on fields. Watch half of it wash into rivers, then wonder why we have algae blooms and dead zones. The Inca figured out sustainable farming 500 years ago, and we're still trying to catch up. But let's get back to the stone sweating, because that's the part that's been making headlines. Tourists have been noticing the moisture for years. Tour guides usually say it's condensation or groundwater seepage. Turns out it's neither. It's intentional. The Inca wanted the stones wet. In Quechua, the Inca language, there's a concept called Kase Pasha. Roughly translates to living world. Everything is alive. The mountains are alive. The rivers are alive. The stones are alive. Western archaeologists usually treat this as mythology, a poetic way of describing nature. But what if it's not metaphor? What if the Inca genuinely believed the stones were alive and engineered them to behave that way? A living stone needs water. It needs circulation. It needs to respond to its environment. And that's exactly what Ollantaytambo's walls do. They adapt, they breathe, they sweat. The Inca didn't just build a fortress. They grew one. This has massive implications for how we understand Inca technology. For decades, scholars have debated how the Inca achieved such precise stonework, like 3D puzzle pieces. No mortar, no gaps, just stone on stone, fitted so perfectly they've survived earthquakes that leveled Spanish colonial buildings built centuries later. The assumption was always that the Incas somehow cut and shaped dry stone to incredible tolerances. But what if they didn't? What if they worked with wet stone? Stone that was softer, more pliable, easier to shape? Then as the stone dried and hardened in place, it locked together. There's historical precedent for this. The ancient Egyptians used water to cut limestone. They'd drill holes, insert wooden wedges, then soak the wedges until they expanded and cracked the stone along precise lines. It's possible the Inca used similar techniques, but on a much more sophisticated scale. Dr. Vasquez's team is now testing stone samples from Ollantaytambo to see if there are chemical markers that would indicate wet working. The results aren't published yet, but if they confirm it, if the stones were shaped while saturated, then we need to completely rethink Inca construction methods, and probably apologize for centuries of calling them primitive. The water system also explains another mystery. The fountains at Ollantaytambo never run dry. Even during the dry season, when rivers in the region drop to trickles, the fountains keep flowing. Archaeologists assumed there was a deep aquifer or underground spring. Nope, it's the chambers. The underground hydraulic battery stores water during the wet season, then releases it slowly during the dry months. It's a reservoir system, but distributed throughout the entire site, instead of concentrated in one location. This makes it more resilient. If one chamber cracks or gets blocked, the others compensate. The system self-balances. Modern cities could learn from this. When a water main breaks, entire neighborhoods lose service. The Inca built redundancy into everything. Their infrastructure didn't fail. It adapted. There's also a spiritual dimension here that's easy to miss if you're just focused on the engineering. Water was sacred to the Inca. The god Wiracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca. Rivers were worshipped. Springs were pilgrimage sites. By channeling water through their most important buildings, the Inca weren't just solving practical problems. They were making the architecture holy. The Temple of the Sun at Ollantaytambo sits at the top of the terraces, and it's where the water system culminates. The stones there are wetter than anywhere else on the site. During certain times of the year, when the sun hits at the right angle, the moisture makes the stone faces glisten. It looks like they're glowing. That's not an accident. That's design. The Inca were master astronomers. They tracked solstices and equinoxes with incredible precision. The water flow changes with the seasons, and the visual effects change with it. During the winter solstice, specific fountains activate, others take over. The entire site is a calendar, a clock, a temple, and a water park, all at once. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de León visited Ollantaytambo in the 1540s and wrote that the Inca could, quote, make water run uphill through sorcery. He wasn't describing sorcery. He was describing hydraulics. But to a 16th century European, advanced engineering and magic probably looked pretty similar. Fast forward to 2026, and we're finally understanding what Cieza de León saw. The vertical channels that feed water into the walls create enough pressure to push water up several feet. No pumps, no electricity, just gravity, pressure differentials, and an understanding of fluid dynamics that wouldn't be formalized in European science for another 200 years. There's a certain irony here. The civilization that supposedly didn't have the wheel managed to create hydraulic systems that modern engineers are studying for insights. Meanwhile, the wheel-inventing Europeans showed up, declared victory, and immediately started breaking things. The discoveries at Ollantaytambo are also changing how archaeologists approach other Inca sites. Teams are now doing ground-penetrating radar surveys at Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, and Pisac, looking for similar underground networks. Preliminary results suggest they're everywhere. The Inca didn't just build on top of the land. They built into it, under it, through it. Every major Inca site might have a hidden hydraulic system we've been walking over for centuries. It's like finding out your house has a basement you never knew about. Except the basement is a masterpiece of pre-Columbian engineering that redefines what we thought was possible without modern technology. So what does this mean for us right now in 2026? First, It's a reminder that indigenous knowledge isn't primitive. It's different. The Incas solved problems in ways European science didn't consider because they asked different questions. They didn't try to dominate nature. They collaborated with it. And their solutions lasted longer than ours usually do. Second, there are practical applications. Urban planners are already talking about bio-integrated architecture, buildings that work with natural systems instead of against them, green roofs, rain gardens, permeable pavements, but at a scale and sophistication we're only now beginning to appreciate. And third, there's the humbling realization that we still don't know everything. Ollantaytambo has been studied for over a century. Thousands of tourists visit every year. Professional archaeologists have mapped every visible stone, and yet the most important feature of the site was hidden underground the entire time. Makes you wonder what else we're missing. What other secrets are buried under the places we think we already understand? The stones at Ollantaytambo sweat because the Inca made them sweat. Because they understood that good architecture doesn't fight its environment. It becomes part of it. Because they knew that the line between living and non-living isn't as clear as we like to think. And because they could. Because they were that good. The fortress in the valley doesn't just stand. It flows. It breathes. It lives. It's still teaching us how.